the number one driver of engagement is. So it's all kind of linked in a 360 way. Culture's a word that people use, but what does it actually mean? You can't just drive people's engagement. You can't drive culture by throwing money at it. And then this client came running out, waving 2 teapots like this in his hand.
Welcome to the Lunch at Work podcast, where we talk to experts about how to make workplaces better.
Murray.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us on the Lunch at Work podcast.
You're welcome.
Very good to have you here. Could you start off by just telling us a bit about who you are?
I am the head of people and talent for BM. That's my current role. I've worked in the business quite a long time. So we're in 2024 now, right?
That is correct.
And I started in the company in 2002. And I started working in the company as a butler in a Japanese bank. We've still got that contract. And I was actually working there as an agency butler. Before that, I'd been working in a gentleman's club. But I'd been working really long hours, round the clock. And the person that I used to contact for agency support, I sort of voiced my frustrations about my current role at the time. And he said, why don't you come and have a look at this role, this butler's role in this Japanese bank? It's contract catering. And I'd never heard of contract catering before, didn't know anything about it. And he said to me, it's Monday to Friday, it's 9 to 5 with really nice equipment, nicely resourced. They've got good facilities. Just go and have a look at it. So I went and had a look at it, and I thought this is much better than my current role. The general manager then left, and they didn't replace him. So they moved the deputy manager up. He became the general manager, and they said to me, you can come into the office and start being a manager. You'll still have to wash the teacups, and you'll still have to set up the rooms for lunches and be the butler. But we think you've got capacity in your role to start learning some of the management side of the business. And I ended up, before I moved into my current field of people, running a big site in Canary Wharf. And what I enjoyed most about it was creating the ethos and the culture and reinforcing the company's values with my team. And so given that, when I came to think, well, I've been here for 4 years, what do I want to do next? I thought moving into the people field would be a good move because it was something I was really passionate about, really interested in. And now I'm the head of people. So that's my little journey.
A lot of the BMT members have had a similar journey in terms of starting off, sort of relatively junior and kind of working their way through.
I think a healthy business has to have a healthy mix of people who've been around for some time and share and reinforce the values and buy into the business. That knowledge and experience is beneficial, but I think there needs to be a mix with fresh people coming in and bringing new ideas to the table. So there needs to be a healthy mix of people who've been around a long time and people who are coming in new. And so when we have opportunities for development and vacancies in managerial roles, we need to look from within, but we sometimes also need to look from without in order to get that balance. So it's important to have that balance. People from outside can challenge from a different point of view what we do, challenge the status quo. That's a healthy thing.
We have the highest rating on Glassdoor. Can you explain to us what is Glassdoor? Why do we have a good rating?
Glassdoor is obviously a rating. It's kind of like the Trustpilot for employers, right? So anyone who works in an organisation can rate any employer that they've worked for or that they're currently working for. And then obviously there's an aggregate score that comes out of all the different star levels that people have got. So we're in the high 4 to 7 to 4 to 9, just underneath 5 stars, the maximum rating you can get. Highest certainly in the contract catering field. Obviously, Glassdoor's been in existence for many years, so that aggregate score we've got has been consistently maintained by people who work in our business and people who have left our business. And what is culture? Culture's a word that people use, but what does it actually mean? It's one of those words, well, the culture's really important.
What does it mean?
What does culture mean? Exactly, what is culture? So I would say, to keep it quite simple, culture is how people feel when they come to work and how they behave. And within that, how they communicate with each other. Those are the ingredients of culture. And we can, of course, put a framework in place such as certain values that we like to hang our culture around. But without the integrity of leadership in terms of instilling those values and reinforcing them and talking about them and keeping them current and real, so they're not just something that's on a mission statement or on a poster on a wall, they're lived and breathed, then the values are not going to influence the culture. But we've got various mechanisms in place, I think, to do that, to bring our values to life and make sure they're lived and talked about every day.
What are BM's values and how do we ensure that they are lived and breathed every day?
So our values are based around the acronym FOODIES, and what that stands for is the first value is fundamentally food. When I first worked for BM back in that Japanese bank I mentioned earlier, one of the first things they did was made us change the sausages on the counter for breakfast, because one of their fundamentals was we don't buy catering sausages in big packs that are cheap. We buy Cumberland sausages from a proper butcher. And that's still true today. It's a fundamental of our business that we do that properly. The next value is obsessive about our people. I like the fact that food and people are the first two values. I would argue that really the people value should come first. But it doesn't work.
These doesn't really work.
But the reason I say that is because you won't have the food without the people that are delivering it. If the people don't believe in that, they won't necessarily do what we need them to do to deliver that food. Then open and honest, that really does speak to culture. The culture we want to have is an open and honest culture. Then we have dedicated to our customers. So what we're doing is we're in business to serve customers. So that's a reminder that's important. Everything we do is tailored towards delivering an experience for our customers. We like to be innovative in all that we do. So innovation is really important to us. Constantly having new ideas is really important for any business in terms of thriving in the marketplace, particularly in a service industry when you're talking about food, keeping on top of current trends in food and service and the experience people are going to have as guests coming into our environments. So innovation is really important, but within that, our focus on people is finding mechanisms to make sure that people bring their own ideas to the table, because the more ideas that are brought to the table, the more innovation we're going to have, right? As is entrepreneurialism. And that kind of links to what I was just saying in terms of people being encouraged to come up with their own ideas and to run their businesses. So people who are running sites as managers or chef managers, they're really encouraged to tailor their particular offer to what they know their customer base wants. People are encouraged to run their little operation, their little BM location as though it's their own business. So now we've got support you can trust. So having a supportive culture is also very important. Support works in every direction. So everybody has a responsibility to support the people around them.
How does BM make sure that everybody knows about those values?
So we have a mechanism in place where we reward and recognise people for living those values. We have an internal communications app. On that, we have a system whereby people can click a button and use a simple form to nominate and recognise any colleague in any direction for living any one of our values. So if you are a KP on the pass and one of the general assistants comes into the kitchen and says, oh, look, you're really stacked up today and I don't have a queue, so I'll help you quickly get through these extra dishes you've got to wash because we had a function upstairs, or whatever it may be, that KP can then nominate that colleague for being supportive. And that person will now get publicly recognised on the Appster. So the comments that the person has made about them will be publicly shared with a little photo. And then that person gets a handwritten postcard sent to their home address with just a little token with that value, reinforcing that they've lived that value. So that happens really quite regularly throughout the working week, that people are celebrated for living our values. Over and above that, all of those nominations get fed into central database, if you like, but that's where we draw our shortlisted nominations for our annual awards. Our annual awards are based around those values. So we reward the best individual and the best team in terms of living those values every year.
We've spoken about values and how that links into the BM culture, but how does that then play a role into things like client retention and client satisfaction? Because obviously if the catering team is happy, that presses onto the client side, doesn't it?
There's a clear link between performance and people, how they feel in terms of how they feel turning up to work every day. So a happy and motivated person will perform better at work. And obviously better performance is going to drive better results in all areas, whether it's qualitative in terms of the quality of the food, the quality of the service, the quality of the experience that people have when they're coming into the environment and being served by our teams. Generally speaking, healthy financial performance is something the client is looking for. And that's really driven by decent uptake, people wanting to come into our facilities and use them. And that's going to happen if the team is performing well. The team will perform well if they feel happy at work. So it's all kind of linked in a 360 way.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you exercise.
Sometimes with exercise, it's going to make you feel better, but you don't feel like doing it. So once you do it, then you'll start feeling like doing it because the endorphins will kick off, you'll start to get the benefits, and you think, oh yeah, I'm going to do more of that. So as somebody who's leading a team, sometimes even though things might not be great and you really want to focus on sorting out all the things that are not great, you've got to make a real effort to start finding anything you can to drive some positive feedback, because that's going to give people that feel-good factor and it's going to help to drive that improvements that you're looking for. I said everyone's got a responsibility to drive culture. Leaders have got a slightly higher level of responsibility. If you're a manager of a team in a closed environment, you've got a really significant impact on that team's culture at work and how they feel about coming to work. And your personal relationship with them is very important. The number one driver of engagement is the relationship somebody has with their direct line manager. And that is based on, do they feel their line manager sees them, is interested in them and values them? The other thing I want to say about culture is you can't just say, I want to have a good culture, let's do these things, and it's going to change. It's a very slow organic process, and it needs these small actions consistently taken on a daily and hourly basis is what drives culture. The analogy I would use is like when you're trying to turn one of those big container ships in the sea. They say you make a tiny course correction, and over miles you get to where you turn, but you can't make sudden course corrections on those big. It's the same thing with culture. You need to put little things in place consistently.
I've never thought of that engagement comes directly from somebody's line manager.
People say engagement, what is it? But, it's not about engaging with people, though it is, but engagement in terms of how engaged somebody feels. And to me, the simple way of saying that, do people want to turn up to work, and do they want to do the best that they can? Things like benefits and wages, and it's not really a drive for engagement. That's something that people expect to have at work. And even if we've recently introduced a really nice new benefits around inclusivity to allow people to have time off for fertility treatment, to allow people to have paid time off at full pay for maternity leave rather than having to take a big pay cut. So when you introduce new benefits, that's great. It's a nice thing to have, but pretty soon people will start thinking, well, that's how it should be.
Yeah.
And that's not a driver of engagement. So you can't just drive people's engagement. You can't drive culture by throwing money at it.
I think that BM have quite a strong and positive feedback culture. What kind of things do BM have in place in terms of feedback?
We do have many different mechanisms giving feedback. First of all, on day one, now this goes back to the days when the company was set up before there was before smartphones, certainly. So when people were given their induction, like their team handbook, we still call it walkabout. That's what we call it. And we still do this today. In the back of the walkabout, there is a little red envelope addressed to the director or the head of people. And that has got in it a little prompter. It's like a little white envelope. It's a free post envelope, a free post red envelope. And the idea is inside there's a little piece of paper that people could use to give feedback about the company. The reason we still give the red envelope, and in a way this is still true, it was still true back in the early days, is to send a message to people that feedback is important to us and we are open to listening to what you have to say. In the front of the walkabout book, there is a dedicated page which lists all senior managers in the business and their personal mobile phone numbers. And that can be accessed by anybody in the business to phone us or text us or WhatsApp us. And again, I know that happens because I get phone calls from managers, senior managers saying, somebody's just spoken to me and this is what they've raised. Could you look into that? We also then, as I mentioned, we have the Appster. So that's a feedback tool. People can use that to openly talk about what's happening in the business in a public way. We do the Be Heard survey every year, which is a chance for really people to give feedback, honest feedback about what it's like to work for BM. We're also currently engaged with investors in people, and that's a bit more of a comprehensive look at things. So that's based on a survey, but it's also then based, once the survey's been done, a facilitator will meet with different focus groups and ask them questions based on the survey data and say, well, this is what the survey's telling me. What's your experience? We also run weekly video calls with all managers, and every 6 weeks we invite everybody onto the call. So there's a really good communication culture where we're constantly communicating out what's happening, allowing people in live in real time to feedback on those calls.
What are they called?
What are they called?
Yeah.
They're called cup of tea calls. Now, it started because it was a phone call before the pandemic, and everyone used to dial into a conference call, and the idea was you'd get a cup of tea and you'd have your cup of tea training. And it used to be about delivering training. It was another way of getting training delivered. But now it's more about communication. It's about people being able to find out what's happening, what are the priorities.
You've obviously been here 20 plus years, as we discovered at the beginning of this podcast. Do you have any funny stories?
One funny story I've got, when we were working our contract, which was linked to the royal family, and it was a big day because the King, now Prince Charles then, was coming to visit that contract. And so they were going to have tea. So they changed the boardroom into this lounge setup. They brought in sofas, and suddenly there was molten brown hand wash in the, which was very disappointingly gone the next day. Anyway, my one job was to set up tea for the Prince of Wales and the client who was going to be hosting this meeting with him to have in the room. And then this client came running out, waving 2 teapots like this in his hand, because we'd done it all apart from put water in the teapot. So he'd gone to serve tea to the Prince of Wales, and there was nothing in the teapot.
The water.
Yeah. So I could still see the flailing tags of this Twining's tea, because we had Earl Grey and English breakfast in case he wanted, so we could offer a choice. I mean, and he came, and I can still see it in my mind, this panic-stricken man.
Safe to say, Murray,
yes,
that you were in a bit of hot water.
Well, you could say.
Do you have any advice for anyone wanting to progress in their career?
Yes, the most important piece of advice I could give you is put your hand up and shout about it. So make sure people know what you want, and that means you have to know what you want. You have to. I mean, sometimes you need help with that, but you need to take some ownership of looking at where do I want to be, even if it's just I want someone to help me figure that out. Please, can someone come and talk to me and help me to figure that out, because I want to develop and I'm not sure which direction I should go in, and then flesh that out with a bit of a research project on what career paths are available and what would you need to facilitate that. I'm a big advocate of personal development planning, and in fact I'm in my role because I did that. So ask for help and make sure people know, and be willing to do some research and put the work into understanding what's available in terms of the direction you want to go in. And then, because you need to be banging your own drum.
And on top of that, I'd say as well to say yes to things, because so many times you get the opportunity to do something, and often you're like, oh, maybe it's not the right time, or I'm busy that day, or whatever it is. But from my experience, say yes and
say
do the
yes,
thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I could have said no when you said you want to do a podcast, right? So it is about saying yes to things. Absolutely agree. And particularly say yes to anything that you want to say no to. Because when you say yes to things you don't want to do, that's where this magic happens. It's all that cheesy phrase, outside the comfort zone, is where, but it's very true. One final thought from me, which I just thought of actually, that in my role as head of people, you know, I really noticed the culture because I spend a lot less time than some other colleagues I talk to in other industries. I mean, I've got colleagues who work separate catering organisations and work in the people field, and they spend much more time dealing with employee relations issues or people who are not happy at work and dealing with the fallout from that, and having to do all those kind of things than I do. And that's a part of my job. There's no getting away from that, but it's a small part of my job. And I'm able to focus more on initiatives that drive engagement, drive culture, try and improve things for people in the business, because I've got bandwidth to do that, because I'm not bogged down with dealing with the fallout from having a not great culture. So it's great. Win-win.
Murray, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and for being open and honest as our values prescribe. But we've learned, I'm sure everybody listening has learned so much about culture and feedback and values, and why it's so important to have those at the forefront of any successful business who puts their people first. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm lucky to be where I am, and I'm very grateful to be asked. So thank you for asking me to take part.
No worries.
This podcast is powered by BM Caterers. Contacting BM is the easiest way to start your journey to a better workplace experience. Click the link in the description for more info.